Recording started, so welcome again everyone to our session for LGBTI activists on useful communication strategies. My name is Svetlana Zakharova and I work with ILGA Europe. With ILGA Europe, I coordinate strategic communications program, and within this program we provide different funding and learning opportunities for the movement. And basically currently within this program we work with two cohorts, two groups of grantee partners, and I'm very happy to say that this session was originally designed for some of our grantee partners and later on together with some of our grantee partners for you. Together with me, this session is hosted by Sho. Sho is a strategic communications consultant who is working with ILGA Europe for many years, but also Sho is working with many other movements and basically providing coaching sessions for LGBTI activists. And also today with us two amazing activists. One of them is Barbara from Newcomers project, RFSL Malmo, Sweden. And also with us today Neo from an organization called Transakcija from Slovenia, who will share with you their experiences. What exactly will happen today? First of all, we will talk a bit about communication strategies and what actually makes good communication strategy. What is the bare minimum and what kind of questions you should ask yourself and what kind of conversations we suggest to have within your organizations and groups to make sure that strategy will not become a burden, but will become an important and useful instrument with you. You will also hear from Neo and Barbara, who recently went through the process of creation of their own communication strategies. And thank you so much for doing that. I think it's very brave that you are joining us today and sharing your experiences and your learnings. Also, we will share some additional materials for you to explore for those who want to go deeper. And also in the end of this session, you will get an assignment. Assignment, of course, is something optional, but I would recommend really to do this assignment, especially if you are just thinking about creation of your own communication strategy or you're just in the beginning of this process. Why? Because everyone who will fulfill an assignment and send it to us will get a feedback, individual feedback, and it will happen exactly in 2 weeks on April 17 during our next Skill Boost session on communication strategies. Even if you do not plan to make an assignment, you're still very welcome to join and to be part of the conversations or just to listen. I think, Sho, could you switch to the next slide? Yes, some technical things. First of all the materials and slides and presentations will be shared with everyone who registered for the Skills Boost, so don't worry, you will get all the materials. And second thing about the way to ask questions. There are quite many of us here today, so probably there will not be much time for conversations. So what I would suggest is to type your questions to the chat box, and I will make sure that all the questions are collected, and we will try to address all of them closer by the end of the session. There will be specifically reserved time for that, and if there will be not enough time to answer all these questions, we will bring them to the next session. And before we will dive into communication strategies, I just want to say that we are doing Skills Boost sessions already for several years, and we covered some quite interesting topics on fundraising campaigns, on media relations, on giving interviews, on data visualizations, and all these sessions were published. And if you're interested, you're very welcome to explore them yourself. And also, if you're currently facing some kind of challenge or communications dilemma you don't know how to approach, you can approach Sho and I. In the end of this presentation, there will be our emails, and Sho and I will try to help you as much as we can. Or maybe your question will become an inspiration for our next Skills Boost session. And with saying that, I'm passing the floor to Sho. Sho, you are very welcome.
Thanks, Svetlana. Yeah, lots of things to plug. Yeah, please do sort of like give us the ideas. We've already got one idea for the next Skills Boost around sort of like paid digital marketing, and that came specifically from a conversations that Svetlana had with some people at the ILGA Europe conference in Ljubljana last year. So we do, and a lot of these sessions came from polls in the Facebook group, which we'll plug at the end as well. So we do act on it. As Svetlana said, I'm Sho. I'm a comms coach for activists. I work with a lot of different movements. And first, just to make sure we know like who's in the room, it'd be great if we could get a sense of where you are in the kind of the cycle of a comm strategy process, because it's a never-ending cycle. So Svetlana's going to put up a Zoom poll, which hopefully you will be able to answer. Like, let us know if it doesn't work for you. Some of you are already doing it. But yeah, so are you thinking about a comm strategy but not started yet? Are you in the middle of comm strategy process, like you have started but you're not finished? Or have you finished it recently and you need to put it into practice now? Or has it been a while since you last did a comm strategy, and so you're actually thinking about renewing, updating, or doing it again, doing it better? I can see quite a few people are. Well, we've got lots of votes already, but I'll give a few more seconds for the remaining sort of 15 or so people to vote. This is really useful to know. If you want to give us more context, please do type into the chat box as well. Like if you're like, well, I'm kind of in between 3 different options here, or it's complicated. Explain why it's complicated. It'd be interesting to hear in the chat box. Let's give it a few more seconds. Okay, maybe everyone who's going to vote has voted. So Svetlana, if you want to share the results. Yep, cool. So we've got the majority of the whole group actually is thinking about it but not started yet. But almost equal numbers of people. There's a substantial minority of you who are in the middle of a process at the moment, and similarly a substantial minority of you who are thinking about renewing or updating a comm strategy that you already have. No one actually said that they've just finished one, and maybe that's because that was a very specific option that we put in there. But okay, that's really interesting. If you would like to give us some more context, so that we know how to kind of pitch the rest of this session. Like, if I'd be interested about I'd be interested in more context from actually all of you, like about why you think you're in that position. That'd be interesting. But okay, so that's good for us to know, is that the majority of you are in the kind of thinking about it phase, but there are a few of you in the middle of it or thinking about renewing. Cool. That's helpful. Thanks. And thanks the first person who's given us a little bit of detail. You've got different programs need to be targeted to different groups and demographics. So you've got that dilemma. I think we will talk about that a little bit today. Okay. So I'm just gonna, as Svetlana said, I'm gonna do a little bit on sort of like what is the bare minimum of a comm strategy before we get into hearing from Neo and Barbara, who definitely did more than the bare minimum. And yeah, thank you also someone who says that you've got 10 different locations with different systems, which makes it hard. So these are interesting sort of variations on different dilemmas to help us understand what it is that the movement finds difficult, or what it is that the movement finds, what is interesting about how our movement is working on communication strategy. A very, very familiar one I think some people might have is that a tiny group that never got to it, but now that there's funding for a project that requires communication, you suddenly need to think, we need a communication strategy, or maybe even a funder has asked for a communication strategy. That's a really interesting sort of like scenario that I think a lot of people might recognize. All right, so start with just to kind of define, because you might have heard people saying the term strategic communications, and you'll actually have heard ILGA Europe talk about strategic communications, because that's the focus of ILGA Europe's support to the members on communications. And you also might have heard people like kind of interchangeably use that word with communications strategy. Like, isn't strategic communications just any communications that is got a strategy? People do throw around these words interchangeably, and we don't need to be like super like dictatorial about comms terminology, but just for the sake of today, so that we know what we're talking about, I'm going to be quite strict about what I mean by it. So I would say that strategic communications is often a bit wider than a single organization. It's normally for a cause. And an example of it would be to so I would say if you're having a meeting with your allies and you're looking at, say, upcoming legal gender recognition legislation that's coming up, and you're having a meeting and you're discussing what should be our messaging, what should be our messengers, what are our tactics for changing the media debate about gender in our country, I would say that's more strategic communications, because it's for a cause, not a specific organization. It's not just about winning an argument. So it's not just about how do I do well on this media interview, but it's about how to change the argument. How do we change the way that the media even frames this debate, or who they bring up for interviews in future. It's generally longer term. Like strategic communications generally needs to be about trying to change things over the longer term. It's generally about multiple voices on multiple platforms. So it's not just one organization doing strategic communications on their own. And to be honest, it's not even just about communications. It often involves much more about culture. You've got to be able to understand psychology. There's often elements from sociology and data that come into it. So that example I gave of like having a meeting with your allies about LGR legislation, that's what I would call strategic communications. And maybe if you then came back from that meeting and then you were discussing with your immediate colleagues, okay, how can we best contribute to that alliance from our audiences? How might we be thinking about how our brand of our individual organization plays in this campaign? Might we use any raise in profile of our brand to attract more volunteers and supporters? And might we then want to work off that to do something different on a different topic? That would say that's the kind of conversation that makes an organizational communication strategy, if that's clear what the difference is. So for the purposes of today, communication strategy is the why, the who, the how, and the where your group communicates with the world. Trying to link those communications goals to like your organizational goals and objectives, and at least setting out your goals, audiences, messages, and engagement, or at least having that question with yourselves. And at a minimum, I would say it's nice to think about it as asking yourselves, so you and your team, your group, however you define that, 4 questions. Why, who, what, and where. And we'll dig into those in a second, one by one. And what I'd really emphasize is the process of asking yourselves those questions and like making sure you actually answer them and you don't just skip past them is way more important than an individual, the person who is the comms lead, writing down what they think are the answers in a PDF. So the process of asking yourself those questions, having those conversations, is to me that is a comm strategy, way more than just a document that you create at the end. We'll share some resources that help you go through those questions step by step. So what I'll do now is I'll just sort of like explain what I mean by what those 4 questions are, and tell you what I see the most common mistakes I see activists, especially in sort of small to medium-sized organizations, make. I'll just stop to make sure. I will occasionally make sure I'm checking the chat box in case people have got clarification questions, or even if you've got existential questions, like massive dilemmas, and you're not even really sure what I'm talking about. Chat box is a good place to ask that, and I'll make sure I'm stopping. Okay, so the first question is why? What are your goals? Why do you even need to communicate? Why do you think it will lead to change? Are pretty like fundamental questions. The most common ways I see activists avoid these questions is not linking it to your overall organizational strategy. That's the most common mistake I see, and that's what leads to kind of like the wasted time of creating a document just lives on a shelf, lives in your computer folder as a PDF somewhere and never gets used. What you might already have an organizational strategy or an organizational theory of change, as it's sometimes called, written down. Like you might already have that as a document. Even if you don't, you might kind of be able to tell us, like you might, if someone asks you like, what's your organization trying to do overall? You might be able to try and write it down. But I would imagine that most of you have some kind of document, which is like, what is your organization about? Or what is your overall strategy? And so I would definitely recommend using that as the starting point. I'm going to pick a completely random example from an NGO from a different sector. I think this is a Novios. This is like some kind of child poverty, child well-being organization, so that it's like less specific to us. And I would say so one way you could do it is you could go for in what they've called impact. Some organizations call this like vision or mission. And yes, someone's asked, can I download these slides? We will be sending you these slides and our speaking notes along with the recording after this session. So yes, so some people call this like the vision bit. So some people call the mission. This organization has called it their impact. This is often where you've got the sort of like the big change you want to see in the world. Like we want to see LGBTI families in Bulgaria live a life free of discrimination and full of joy. It was something like that. Now, super important that your communication strategy is aligned to this vision. So you should definitely be checking like, does our communication strategy help towards this vision? But I would generally find that kind of like asking the question about what your goals are, this kind of stuff is a bit too big. It's a bit too broad. It's a bit too long term to be able to have a communications goal that is linked to it. On the other side of these kinds of organizational strategies is this group's called the inputs and outputs. You might have called it activities or interventions or something like that. So basically, this is the bit where your strategy, your organizational kind of strategy might say, and we will do this by running a community center where people can come along, and we will do this like by creating a helpline for LGBTI youth, and we will do this by lobbying for this particular legislation change. So that's where sort of like your activities might be. And so obviously, these are the things we do. This is the stuff we do. And that's got to obviously be like linked with your communication strategy, because these are your main places where you're actually going to do your communicating. But this is not the best place to start with your goals, your question with your conversation with yourselves about why you need to communicate and why you think it will lead to change. Because if you base your communications goals just on what your organization's current activities are, you might be a bit limiting yourself by like, what are the kind of current work you do? What I would recommend starting with, if you have done this kind of process about what your overall organizational strategy is something more in the middle. So this group, this organization, this deliberately non-relevant NGO I'm showing you the example of on screen, has called them outcomes. You might have already called it goals or priorities. I've seen some groups call it. These are often sort of the bits in between. They're often the kind of like, we do the community center, and the big thing we're trying to change is that families in Bulgaria feel safe and secure. And the way that that's supposed to contribute to that big vision is X. I'll give an example actually from the one on screen. So they've put under long-term outcomes, local leadership achieves greater visibility and influence in policies related to child and youth rights. So that's a kind of example of this kind of in-between outcomes, goals, priorities, whatever you might call it. I think this zone is normally the best place to pick to sort of like work your communications goals towards, because this is a bit more like, oh, I can see how comms can actually help achieve this. That would be my tip, and the most common mistakes for the question of why. I spent quite a few minutes on that, but that is the most important one. The next question is who you're going to need to achieve these goals. Who do you need to communicate with? It's important to make sure here that you're not just listing a bunch of audiences that you already have, but you're linking it back to the why question. You're specifically articulating and you're challenging each other. You're saying, like, how do you know that's true to your colleagues? How are those audiences contributing to those goals? Right? Because that's what makes them relevant to this particular communication strategy. That's what helps you understand like how to prioritize them. A simple exercise you can do that can sometimes help with this is like having a conversation with your teammates about, say there's a specific audience that you can think of. Do you need them to pressure? So do you need to pressure them? Do you need to persuade them? Or do you need to mobilize them to achieve the goals that you just outlined? Because the common mistakes I see is sometimes people just list a decision maker. or sometimes they even just list a category and say decision makers are our audience. And I would challenge you to be more specific than that. And they think, oh, the decision maker, I can just persuade this decision maker. What they need is more facts. What they need is, I just need to sit down with this anti-gender right-wing politician, and then I could persuade them if only I had 20 minutes with them. But often these people, you can't persuade them, or at least it's not relevant whether you persuade them or not. What they respond to is pressure. And so actually, you need to think of them as a kind of pressure target. Similarly, I see people sometimes thinking that they need to just talk to the people who already agree with them without thinking about new audiences that they need to persuade to bring over, because we don't have enough people agreeing with our position. But I also see people spending too much time thinking about focusing on the people who disagree with you and maybe fundamentally disagree with you, and it'd be very hard to persuade them over. And actually, you maybe need to spend more time mobilizing the people who do agree with you to bring more people over to your side. And you need to kind of accept when some people are a bit of a waste of effort. So that I think that having that honest conversation with yourself, are they people we need to pressure? Are they people we need to persuade? Or are they people we need to mobilize to achieve the goals that we just set out in our kind of goal setting conversation? That's the kind of honest conversation that you should have with your teams, and that skipping that is what results in problems later. The question of what you then say, what do you tell, or what do you ideally show your audiences rather than just say something to them in order to pressure, persuade, or mobilize them. This is a huge topic, and ILGA Europe actually do lots of sessions and resources on what you might have heard called framing or narrative work. I think here's the best thing is just to refer you to those resources that already exist. So the ILGA Europe Framing Equality toolkit has all the basics you need about like thinking through LGBTI framing, framing LGBTI equality. And what I would just acknowledge here is the thing that's slightly different here, because that might sound a little bit like strategic communications, right, about a cause. Obviously, in your communication strategy for your organization, you're going to want to have a bit of a focus on how do you communicate about your organization? So who are you? What's your USP? What's your services? What makes you different? Why should people support you? There's loads of different approaches to doing this, about doing organizational messaging, storytelling, brand positioning. You're gonna hear a couple of those examples in a second from Neo and Barbara. The mistake that I would urge you to avoid is don't just do kind of like generic adjectives about what you'd like in your messaging. Just do some actual messaging. Like try and do some real sentences. Try and write some real sentences. Try and cite some real images that you would use in real contexts, like a social media post, the About Us page on your website, the little bit that you put at the bottom of a press release, or the 3 seconds you have to introduce your organization when you're interviewed in a media interview. Try to force the question of like, what kind of a message do we want about our organization into a real example. Don't just have like a whole list of like, we want our tone of voice to be compassionate, but also professional, but also corporate, but also grassroots. And also we want to be super concise, but also we need to make sure we don't simplify the issues. Like I see often, sometimes people just have that kind of like wish list about what their messaging is, and they don't just try and do that messaging in an example, like what would you have in the About Us website? How would you make sure that is under 100 words? And that forces an honest conversation with your colleagues about like, well, is this compassionate? Do we have to make a compromise on simplicity versus complexity? That would be the main thing that I often see as becomes a bit of a waste of time in people's comm strategies. And then finally, if you have honestly discussed those 3 questions, then you're ready to talk about the question of like, where do you go and engage people with? There's a big temptation that people start with this question, and they start from social media backwards and communications platforms backwards with their communication strategy. 2 kind of actually opposite mistakes I see people make most often with discussing this question. They either limit themselves to starting with the platforms they're already on. So they say, well, we do a monthly newsletter, so that is our communications platform, without thinking about like, what is it that those audiences that you identified need. But sometimes people go too far the other way as well. And I definitely see people sometimes say like, well, we'd really like to communicate with young people, and we know we need to have young people involved in our strategies. So therefore, I guess TikTok is our platform. And you can see in their eyes that they're terrified and they have they have no like worldly way of being on TikTok. You need to balance the right combination of where your audience are, where you have some kind of capacity or at least potential for capacity, and where, by where I mean what platform suits the format of your communications, what best suits you. So it's that's the sort of like kind of freeway balance you're gonna have to make. And then finally, one other sort of mistake I often see people, they're just throwing a bonus one. People way overemphasize social media when they're doing these kinds of engagements. And I would say, and it's not just the thing that's happened in the last couple of weeks with Meta limiting political content, and they think LGBTI existence is political content in all their platforms, or YouTube allowing disinformation and not bothering about censoring it anymore for this year's elections. This has been for a long time. Social media is the most fickle and often the least value for effort platform. And so like if you're not got email, web, or just in-person, organizing and campaigning or mainstream media as part of your mix there, you're going to be a bit vulnerable to whatever Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk decides to change next week. So that's just one bonus mistake. Okay, I've talked too much already. Let's actually look at some real examples. So our main event, two people who took, as Svetlana said, they took part in ILGA Europe's kind of comms learning journey cohort last year, where they were very brave to present their work in progress communication strategies to the rest of the group. And now they're being even braver to share it with a much larger group and to tell us how it's gone since then. So yeah, as Svetlana said, we're going to hear from Neo from Transakcija in Slovenia in a second. But I wanted to ask the first question to Barbara from RFSU's Malmö's Newcomers project in Sweden. Barbara, you probably should give us a little sort of like just you can introduce yourself and what Newcomers actually is better than myself and Svetlana have. Could you introduce that, and also what was your need for a communication strategy? Like why did you bother turning up to the session? Why did you go through this process in the first place? I'll turn off screen share so that we can actually see you.
Okay. First off, can you hear me all right? Amazing. Okay. Thank you for word. I'm Barbara, and I work in Malmo in the organization called RFSL Malmo, and specifically for a project called Newcomers. And we work with and for LGBTQ plus asylum seekers and refugees in the region. What we are really trying to do is we are always somewhere between grassroots work and institutional work, because on our day-to-day work, we are really trying to just be there for queer refugees and create community and assist them with anything they need. But at the same time, with our organization, we also need to have a good communication, and we have certain structures. So we're always fluctuating somewhere between grassroots and really institutional organization. And we are obviously very understaffed. We haven't had any, and still don't really, person that would be responsible specifically for communication. So what I realized is that if we want to spread our message and if we want to get better, we should start thinking about it. I think that's the first start, to think about how you want to improve the communication. And the main reason why I started doing it, I think about it, is because I have become extremely frustrated because communication has become very hard. Because I tried too many things, and it felt like I was just, jumping from one project to another with not exactly strategy, or it didn't have a result that I wanted. So in order for me to simplify my work, I realized that I really need to sit down and work on the communication strategy and work on it continuously. So this is just a short introduction of my organization, the project I work with, and also why we felt like that it's so important to sit down and really think about it.
Great, thank you. And we'll come back to some specifics on that in a second as well. And I can see there's already some questions coming in. Neo, same question to you, basically. Sort of like, if you could just give us a little bit of your own introduction to yourselves, and also like, what was your need for a communication strategy? Why was not having a strategy hindering you?
Hi everyone, I'm Neo and I work for Transakcija here in Slovenia. We are a trans-specific organization and I just joined last year after a huge change in the collective, in the organization. So that played part into the thoughts we have or had on how we communicate and to whom we are communicating and how do we frame our messages. Basically, there wasn't a communication strategy for this organization. It's a small NGO. And with the team fully changed, this completely came to light. A lot of communications just could not be implemented suddenly, as there were no guidelines, no identity or no strategic filters on how to decide on what to decide on. A lot of communications just, the situation just boils down to decisions that we made, and the decisions on how we communicate or if we communicate at all, they were made on the basics of, having the best argument in the situation, in the moment. And that was just tiring work. That was tiring work, and our communication was not consistent. Basically, what we found out is that the comms and the internal structure of the organization are, especially in the nonprofit sector or activism, they are just closely intertwined. And when our internal structure was not stable, that really showed quickly through our messaging. And it kind of goes both ways. We found out that the constant need for interaction kind of put us in the state of, just constantly catching up. And we did not have a plan in place or tools in place on how we deal with not even planning for long term, just, effectively catching up to the communication needs of the very moment. So yeah, that was kind of the our situation or the need for a communication strategy.
Thank you. And before we get onto like actually looking at your comm strategies, both of you, Neo, you also had a kind of an interesting hurdle to get over, and just like, which I think a lot of people will have, persuading your teammates that this was something that was worth spending time on in the first place. I thought you had an interesting sort of like approach to that hurdle. Could you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, the first step in our communication strategy building was actually onboarding the team, as there was a need for us to understand that amidst, all the different priorities, and they really were priorities. Why are we dealing with this now? Why are we doing that now? The communication strategy that does not seem to have, an immediate or a direct connection. So the approach we took was to basically, I showed the team a presentation on I can share the screen to maybe show you a bit. So like a short presentation, we don't need to go over it. And I promised them that it would last no more than 15 minutes. So I have the timing, here. I asked the ChatGPT to generate me a map, like a market map or of sorts, because this is the feeling I get, and I think we kind of all get, nowadays, where every corner is like an opportunity and every corner can be a risk, and you don't know where to turn your head, right? So I asked Nuka and Leah, my team at the time, to look at the image for 5 seconds and then close their eyes and then just tell me what's in the image, like what did they remember? And they remembered nothing, of course, because it's a it's a cluster of everything, right? And everything is just, yeah, the more you zoom in, the more nothing there is. So then we did it again, and I asked them to just focus on the pink, you know, stuff in the images. And they closed their eyes and they could tell me a bit more, you know, on what is in the image. So that was kind of the exercise that I felt got them thinking that, oh, maybe, you know, having this master map, I called it, is something beneficial to have when you are trying to navigate this overbearing, overloaded, just map of things and not knowing how to organize yourself. So then I just kind of pinpointed those three beliefs I have, and this is what I always show when you know when I'm trying to explain why having a communication strategy is really, really important. I usually say those three things. I said that if we have strong foundations, our messaging impact will be better. And if we have custom strategy design, not just, you know, following something generic guidelines, we can mitigate our own uncertainties, right? And if we build our capacities in-house, that will, you know, give us sustained growth. So we kind of talked about this, these 3 points, and we got to the point of actually agreeing. So then the next part is a bit more boring because we just went into the, you know, the questions we might have, and we found out that we are actually asking ourselves these questions I put here, and not only those questions, more of them even. So so we kind of finished with a little plan to treat it like a game. And we here is what we did. I will not show you everything, but we just kind of, you know, put the communication planning or communication strategy strategizing into sort of a game, and we treated it like a oh, we need to build a character and we need to, you know, create a game out of it. So yeah, but maybe more on that later with the actual implementation. So yeah, that would be my answer. Oh.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, and having sort of like a reassurance that this will only take this amount of minutes, and having the kind of video game aesthetic is definitely something that would probably work on me. Nice. Yeah, we definitely will come back to the actual like what happened in the strategy. But to sort of like keep going back and forth, Barbara, what were the? Could you talk us through like what actually happened? Like, were you having Zoom meetings? Were you meeting together with your colleagues in person? What were the sort of like, how did you get started? I think a lot of people might want to know the question, like, where did you start? How did you get started?
Right. Yes. Identifying where to start is often the hardest, but when I sat down and I thought about how I can make it easy for us is to realize what we already have. What we already have available for us when it comes to communication. And what we already have available is internet, because we wanted to write a ChatGPT, yes, that. We wanted to write a communication strategy, but like, what should it entail? What should be in communication strategy? I asked ChatGPT, what should be in communication strategy? I really needed headlines. I really needed to know what I should put there, because communication strategy sounds very exciting, very professional. But what is there? So I asked ChatGPT, and ChatGPT gave me a very good headlines of what I should focus on. So that was the first thing that I did. Perhaps I can also share the screen with our communication strategy. What do you think?
That'd be great. No, I think you might need to stop sharing so that Barbara can do that.
Okay, I'll try. It's this one. Can you see it all right?
Yep.
Okay, brilliant. So as you can see, everything in red is updated after internal review. So I also going back to the communication strategy all the time. And all the headlines you can see have been given to me by internet. So I know that I need to focus on knowing our desired audience. Then I learned that we should have some key messages, content creation and distribution, media relations to publicity. So that gave me already a sort of a map of what I should do next and what I should focus on. So what I first do is define us. So what do we do? So that was a very important exercise for us when we sat as volunteers and staff to identify us, what we do, and where we're good at, and how we want to be presented to the wider audience and to the public. So we wrote out a short introduction to the aims and objectives of our project. Most of it is really to provide assistance when it comes to legal, social network for our target group, which is queer asylum seeker, but also indeed to increase public awareness and advocate for queer rights, specifically for asylum seekers and refugees. So how we started is with us sitting and writing communication strategy, but what we also did was that we organized several activists workshop within our group of queer asylum seekers, and we asked them, what do you need? What do you find as the most alarming issue currently? And how would you like us to proceed? Would you like to be involved? Are you comfortable with being involved in our communication strategy, or you're not feeling comfortable being involved in our communication strategy? What are the things that really bugs you and that are everyday problems? Because indeed, queer asylum seekers have very, very difficult lives, and they're facing challenges every day. So that was a very rich conversation that we had with our target group. So we also needed to know, we involved as many people as possible when it comes to advocacy, and those people are those that we advocate for. So that was very important for us to know the alarming issues, because sometimes we might we might miss what is actual issue. I feel like indeed first thought that I would have with the communication on queer asylum seekers is, well, how to make the legal process easier for them. Indeed, that's a problem. But actually, what was a daily issue for queer asylum seekers was their accommodation, because they lived in terrible conditions. So that was something to also identify, that maybe we have like a big picture of where we want to create a change, big plans, but maybe we can also start with trying to address day-to-day issues. Indeed, this is very specific for our target group, but maybe it could also be for some of you. Now we were asked or invited to do main objectives of our communication strategy. And this was for me a very challenging task to do, because you suddenly realize that you want 1 million objectives. You want a better life for all queer asylum seekers. What that means, I'm not sure. Because there are 1 million things how we can improve their lives. So, and in order for us to do it effectively, we should narrow things down. So as you could see, I first wrote around six objectives, but at the end of the day, when I reviewed it again, the prioritize are first 3, and then spillovers, I call them like that, I don't know if it's even correct, are the last 3, which means if we do the first things right, then we can expect that the spillovers, for instance, encouraging donations to support our initiatives, would be also improved. So what was very important for me, increasing public awareness of queer asylum seekers' challenges and fostering empathy and understanding. And I want to highlight the word empathy, because not only we want to talk to wider public as straight cis public, but we want to also talk to our community and garnering that empathy. for queer asylum seekers, because that issue is often forgotten, especially in a country like Sweden, where queer rights are more or less okay. And then the other prioritized objective was garnering support from stakeholders, which means policymakers. So we want to be visible. We need them, policymakers, politicians, on a local, but also on a governmental level. They need to know that we exist, and they need to know that we are a group that will lobby for this, for our target group, and at the same time we are producing activities and we are visible. So that's very important. Now the thing is how to make yourself visible. That's a obviously big topic, because exactly, I agree with Shaw when you said that social media are fickly. They are super fickly, because you start to make like a nice post and stuff like that, but what you end up being with 3 likes, especially if you don't know how to do it, or if you're just in the beginning. So that was a little bit frustrating for me. Like, we are communicating, we are presenting issues that is very, is very challenging, and is very perhaps interesting as well for a lot of people, we like to believe. But the engagement was rather low. So we know that if we want to, I realized that if I want to access policymakers, that's not through our social media. So how can I do it? How can I make it as easy as possible? Because that's also to think, and to make it simple. And we were quite lucky with that, but at the same time, it also would be able without the luck, and that is make a friend with a journalist. Write them, even if it's a local journalist, but don't be afraid of contacting journalists in the newspaper, because actually you're not doing them or they're not doing you a favor. You are doing them a favor, because they want stories. So what we realized is we made a friend with a journalist that is interested in the topic. We were lucky there, though, because one of our newcomers knew the journalist, so he brought her. But it is very possible to also just reach out to them, because they actually want to write about issues that attract the eye of the reader. So and that was the way when I got a reach to policymakers. So after 2 articles that was released about us, published about us, I started to gain phone calls from varied party representatives, and I started to meet them, and there were, we started to talk about safety of queer asylum seekers. And we started to talk about how we can make a safer accommodation for queer asylum seekers. And the only way how they found us is through the journalists, the reporters. So
Brilliant.
Also use what you make it simple for you. I think that's what I realized, and use the capital of people around you.
Nice to have that example of how it led to an impact, and also nice to have your example of how you dealt with the dilemma of having 6 different priorities. I think that's something that a lot of people say is like, but it's not that one is not important. It's more that, as you said, you can achieve one by making a breakthrough on the others. And I can see in the comments also someone's also mentioned that it's really great that you'd identified the issue of views amongst the LGBTI community on migrants and refugees as well. Before we move on to some of the other kind of like dilemmas you had, could I ask? Actually, no. Let's take, because otherwise we do lots of swapping with the screen sharing. What was the most difficult, like the conversation that you had to have with your colleagues or internally in your own head about making a difficult decision, whether it's about the objectives or the audiences or the platforms that you're talking about?
I think being in the team always was that question for me? Yes, it was good. Okay.
Yes,
I think is the method of how we want to reach our audience. And also like artistic styles, for instance, right? Everyone wants it to look a little bit differently. But also, I think what really served us when it comes to having a difficult conversation and preventing them is reach out to people who we advocate for and to as many people as possible. So we asked all queer asylum seekers that we know. And we use that activist workshop kind of event where we ask them, and we wrote that on the board. And basically, the target group decided themselves what they see as the most alarming, and we do it periodically. We do it at least twice a year, where we are going back to these topics, whether it's still actual or whether there is something new that we need to focus on. So that's what prevented us from difficult conversations. But that's our context, right?
Really interesting. Thank you. Okay, so maybe we could have a little look at a different type of comm strategy, if you're able to stop sharing, Barbara. Neo, could you sort of show us? I think there was some kind of like interesting visual things in your work, but maybe with a similar question, like, was there a difficult decision you had to make to reach these conclusions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we sort of we got to or maybe I'll state it that way. Our comm strategy as a general term has sort of like 3 pillars. One is the profile, the identity, we call it. One is the actual comms plan. And one important aspect was actually skills boost in the organization. So we sort of treated it as such. And we did, I will share my screen now. So basically the first 2 are, they are just 2 documents we have in our drive, and I will show you some of the highlights maybe as we speak. And comms is also, the document, nothing interesting about it. While the actual workspace we created is in the Figma. I can also show you that. Looks like that. So that was an important part of actually creating our communication strategy. Never mind that this is a visual part, because this is Nuka's workspace now. But those, purple lines actually contain every single, decision that we make as we go. So if we decide on something, we make sure to note it, oh, this is only, I lost the word, changed at some, bigger events, or just state the decision and put it down. This was our first rule. I maybe want to show this, because this is how we got to our identity doc and all of the maybe highlights I wanted to show. So we had this specific situation of that maybe a lot of you, of course, know of, already having some communications in place, even though we did not have the communication strategy in place. And we knew that we cannot stop communicating for 6 months. We cannot shut down the organization to create a communication strategy and then, just begin the interaction with all of our target audiences. So the first thing we actually did was a plan to create a communication strategy, and this is here in the blue slides. Basically, just to showcase how we onboarded ourselves to this mission of creating a communication strategy. So we treated it as a sort of a 2-way approach, a dual approach, where the renovation with the rebranding, redesign, with everything was one project, and the fast entry, we called it, is another project. And we split all of the things that go into those 2 projects into the, you know, category they actually fit in. So we said, okay, the complete organizational profile is part of the rebranding or innovation, but like a digital presence strategy is needed now. We need it now. So we sort of split the things into the things we have time to work on and things we don't have the time to work on, and we need to create them as we go. So this was kind of the first strategy we agreed on and put into writing, and we did that. This is something about why we should do that and what are the core components that have to do with our actual specific programs. And we created sort of like one of the maybe more interesting questions we asked ourselves was, well, you know, if you are creating your communication strategy as you go, like what is left for you to showcase in the end of the process? You know, if you slowly launched all of the elements as you went, there is no big thing, you know, to at the end of it to showcase. But we sort of felt the need to do that because our communications changed so much in regards to what was here before. So then we actually did like a bunch of exercises. I have them here in green. Some of them more structured than the others, and some of them stolen from the industry. Like we did a SWOT analysis, like who does that? But it's actually really, really, really beneficial if you try to, you know, put it in your own terms. So we kind of did, you know, those three really important chapters for us. One was the existing identity evaluation. One was, you know, all of these things, mission, style, archetype, we called it. This is one of the industry models. I can talk about that more because it really, really helped us. And then to identify and strategize regarding our users, our partners, and our competition. Everything was kind of, you know, overpowered by our understanding of what are we actually creating when we create our identity or communication strategy or whatever, what goes into that. And the questions we asked ourselves were kind of similar to the ones Sho was presenting earlier. But we did it sort of narratively. We said, okay, we need content, we need a story, we need to know the narrator, we need to know the context, where is our message presented, where it is not presented. This was kind of an important question for us because we had a lot of platforms, and we quickly realized that we need to cut some of them because they are not beneficial to us, or they just don't make sense for our strategy. Who is our audience and how authentic is our presentation? So then we basically did those exercises. We sat down and we did them. We screenshotted the parts of our old website and just, you know, scattered the things into keep and into lose. We went to some other organizations and saw how they are doing things, and just took what we liked and talked about that. Why do we like it? What we don't like? Why don't we like it? Then we did this. This is one of the most fun exercises for me. So this is where I will also show the example of what we actually did as an outcome. But it started with that. It started with 3 graphs, empty graphs. And we are doing profiling a chapter placement now, I said. So we identified a few of the organizations in our neighborhood, I call it. Basically everyone we think we want to relate to, everyone that does the work we do, you know, just everything we could think of. And then we started to place them on this graph a bit. The first question, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is that you need to know your axis of value. The first thing we had to do was to actually identify, like, what is this point and what is this point, right? what are the measures of our success? How do we see our success ourselves? So this is how we did that slowly, realizing that we have 4 different graphs. We have 4 of them because we have 4 programs as an organization, and we work in vastly different areas of work. We work in advocacy, but we also work in, information education. And looking at those 2 graphs, they don't have our partners or collaborators, as we call them, scattered in the same way. They are not even the same organizations. So basically, we learned just a lot of just trying to place different organizations and what do we know about them in our local neighborhood or just area of work. And yeah, what is the success in different program strands, and how do we position ourselves regarding to other organizations in this axis of value. This was a fun exercise, and then maybe those 2 are also interesting. When we were creating a mission, it was impact before in Show's example, and yeah, we just took our existing mission, and if I remember correctly, or I can just look into the document, our first mission, as it was written, was that we are the first and only trans-specific organization in Slovenia where trans persons work with trans persons for trans persons. We liked that. We just didn't think it is conveying our message fully, or yeah, just that it's just not telling everything that we have to tell. So we said, okay, we need to renew that. Then we looked at some cases of how the other people do it, talked about that a lot, and then just started to create our new mission, which it showed was quite different from the first one. It was important for us that we tell, like in the first sentence, that we are a queer and trans-specific and trans-feminist organization. It was important to us that we tell how do we work, that we work inclusively and transparently and intersectionally, because those words were like the pinnacle of how we saw our mission implemented. It was important to us that we tell in the first sentence, what do we actually do? Like, how do we do our mission? How are we reaching our goals? So we did that, and our mission statement came out a bit more cohesive and maybe a bit more holistic that we had before. Sorry.
That's great. I might interrupt you just to make sure that there's chance for other people to ask questions as well, but that's really useful. People have been asking in the chat whether we could share these strategies so people have something to kind of like start with. You're both nodding, so I assume that, like, obviously exclude anything that's confidential, and you don't have to translate everything into English for people. People can use Google Translate, but I'm assuming you're nodding, saying that's some of this we can share. Yeah,
of course, I'd be so happy to. Yeah, yes,
great. So I'd encourage everyone to ask questions in the chat box, as Svetlana says, and then we can pick a couple, we'll pick hopefully more than a couple for everyone to answer. While people are thinking and typing, could I just ask one quick question to both of you, which is, what's one thing that didn't go quite right in the process that you would advise other people to learn from your mistakes, so to speak? Whoever wants to go first.
Maybe I can start, but I think I already mentioned it maybe a little bit in the beginning, and that is not having a strategy. So not trying to encompass absolutely everything. Trying
the thing about having six objectives at the beginning, is that what
exactly. So I think that was a mistake, and also I wouldn't call it mistake though, but it was, let's call it a learning curve, but it took a lot of energy and time to realize that some some forms of advocacy and some forms of campaigning does not work for us. Perhaps you have to try them. My example, for instance, was online seminars and workshops. It took a lot of time from the person that needs to do the workshop, and we did not get a lot of interested people, which I'm very happy that this seminar is is so popular, but it didn't work for us. So, but we needed to try it, right? So, so I think the mistake was being too broad in our goals.
Yeah, and for us, it was, of course, a lot of things that we could have done differently, having the knowledge, but maybe the one that I found the most interesting was assuming prior knowledge. I wrote down. That was kind of a big change from what we actually thought about the position we are in, or the state we are in regarding our users and other stakeholders, that we thought that they have this immense knowledge about a lot of things, and we felt the immense pressure of upholding this standard of the information we put out, or the way we put information out, while we actually learned through creating the communication strategy and involving our target audience and actually identifying their profiles, that we need to scale down, that we need to tell less, that we need to tell the basics again and again and again. And a lot of this knowledge was, kind of helped us navigate our own strategy better.
Really useful. Thanks both. So I think the first question Svetlana's sort of like noticed, and actually a couple of people asked a different version of it, is how does capacity play into the comm strategy? Like, when in this process do we think about what we're actually able to do? And maybe just someone asked a similar question about organizations. What you were talking about, having to prioritize activities due to limited resource. Any tips on how to balance that and still be able to cover things like different audiences, authorities, communities, partners, allies, society? It's a big question, but maybe if you even have like a little tip for how you balance the kind of capacity issue and still being able to cover different audiences, that would be really interesting. Again, whoever.
Yeah, I would say what I did was I realized what we already have. We had a great contact and reach to Malmo Pride, for instance. So using and collaborating with other organizations that are in your neighborhood is incredibly important to because what they can do, they can share you, right? They can provide you with things you don't have. For instance, Malmo Pride provided us with a great venue and their communication abilities, right? So then we had some collaboration with the local universities, right? And that gave us a lot of we got to reach a completely new audience, which was more scholars and academics, and that's what we also want, because we want to be a hub of knowledge regarding queer migration in Sweden, right? So realize who is in your neighborhood, who can help you out, and contact them and start collaboration. That way you don't, the capacity can be small, like we have very small capacity. We don't have resources, maybe material, people, but then if you collaborate with your friends who have, then we can reach them. So yes, collaborations.
Yeah, from my side, I think I would say that just treating your communication strategy as a constant work in progress, that is what I find the most useful, because it just never stops. and once you start looking into how you can, get your message across, and what are the ways that you can act at, and what are the, opportunities that it brings you, it can never stop, never. It is there are a lot of elements that can become core elements when you start thinking about it, right? So just walking that fine line between, yes, thinking about it clearly and structurally and giving yourself time before you launch something, but at the same time, just at one point, you know, making the decision, it's a really important thing. And especially when we want things to be done well, I think that we tend to maybe sometimes overthink, but making the decision at one point is really, really just important. Yeah.
Did either of you, so there's a question about sort of like, how did you manage to balance when you had multiple audiences? Like, did it have that kind of dilemma? And there's someone else who also had a very specific question about age groups as well, like audiences of different age groups. So only if that was relevant to you, but did either of you come up against that dilemma?
Yeah, we actually, that was one of the biggest challenges for us, because we have immensely different target audiences, spanning from you know, the underage user, a trans person in school, to like a minister or something, you know, in that lane. So we quickly recognized the because we started out as, you know, okay, we need to find a strategy on how to address all of these different, you know, target audience that we identified, and we now know who they are. But that was not actually, that did not work for us, because, you know, even when you're working with lawmakers or policymakers or media, they are just different people, and they are just one demographic that have a lot of different profiles. So what actually worked for us was identifying our own elements of the message, try to deconstruct the message to its own, you know, significant but basic parts, and then just start combining them. You know, oh, we want to be, you know, compassionate, like Svetlana said earlier, or we want to be bold, or we want to be something, you know, else. What combination of elements that we have in place can help us? And this boiled down to having, you know, 3 visuals, and I think it was like less than 10, it was like 7 crucial messaging points. And you can find, you know, there are a lot of combinations that can be made. Yeah.
We had a very specific question about advocacy in a decision maker context in Bhutan. So I hope that person doesn't mind if I try and make that question a bit more general. But Barbara, you had quite a few like decision makers and policy makers as one of your key audiences. Did you have to come up with new tactics, or did the process of having a communication strategy help you think of new things to actually do, as opposed to just say, yes, they're important?
Right. So when it comes to meeting politicians and policymakers, yes, it's always different if I meet a politician from economically right party and or economically or left party. It's a completely different discussion. And sometimes I do feel like I am, I have an ethical problem sometimes, or dilemma, how I should talk about it. And let me give you an example. And this might infuriate you, because it infuriates me, right? So when I talk to, for instance, political parties from more the left, we talk about queer migration as such, of a human to have a right to live safely, and to have a right to live in dignity, right? If I talk to a politician from more right-wing party, what I talk about is getting queer asylum seekers getting freedom when they are being helped to get a job, right? As a future taxpayers, as a future active members of the society, where they can reach their true potential and freedom if you help them to get to work. So of course, I mean, these are, you know, I mean, I have a problem with that on personal level, but these are preparation for the meeting with politicians and policymakers is actually important, doing that little homework on what they listen to. But still,
but it was sorry, go ahead, finish.
Yeah, but when it comes to communication, I'm going back to that, is also to realize what method works for at what kind of audience, right? So we realize that for politicians and policymakers, the being present on newspapers, right? Being publicized like that by a third party, that was important. Being, for instance, garnering empathy among queer community. For us, what works is being very present during Malmo Pride, because that's where the majority of queer people go to. And then when we want to reach out to more like scholars and academics, then we need to be in contact with universities, and that gives us certain profile as well. So I think just to realize who's the audience who we want to reach, and then it will also tell you what's the easiest way to reach them. I'm sure, did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and I think that's useful, because the thing, what you said about the trying to appeal to politicians of the right is, at least, I guess, then I think what one or both of you mentioned it, having that conversation already and making that decision in advance, like, these are people who don't necessarily share our values totally. This is how important they are, so we know we need to do something with them, and this is how far we're willing to compromise on changing our messaging for them. Having agreed that in advance, so that it's not up to you to sort of like make that decision in the room or in the meeting, is that sounds like it was a valuable step of this process of a comm strategy. I want to just squeeze in one last question that someone asked. I think, Neo, this might be for you, because someone's asked, is there any difference between a communications strategy and a communications policy? And I wonder whether you had up on screen for a second, you don't need to share it again, but you could just talk us through it, something which you call the comms guideline, right? And that could maybe you just explain how those meaningfully different for how you actually use them.
Yes, just a disclaimer that everyone might, understand those words. We relate to communications differently. For me and for us, the communication strategy is just everything. Is the three things I listed before. Is the whole profile, is the communication plan, or the guidelines that are the second thing is in this equation, and the internal, skills and capacities. While the communication guidelines are more of the, plan, I think I would use the words, and that might differ, regarding what organization you are. For us, what worked was just listing the strategic filters, because we saw that we work regarding communications through decisions we make regarding communications, because that happens every day if you're a trans organization. And that was the approach for us. So it was the strategic filters, but it might be something else for another organization. So just, for me, I understand the communication strategy as this, broader thing that has a lot of elements that need to be strategically positioned. And the guidelines are more of like, what's the plan? How do we do it? How do we use the communication strategy?
And is that, and practically, is that where you had things like, we use this word to talk, we use this phrase to talk talk about Transakcija, we don't use this, or we use this, we say these kinds of things, we don't do these kinds of things?
Exactly. I might just show this specific thing here, because it might answer my question better than I can in words. Just, this, I call it ID Codex and Content Library and User Guide, because they are the fancy words I use. Basically, ID Codex is, the profile I was talking about earlier, is the things that we know and have to reflect. And then having a content library in your comms plan is basically what you said, Show. So it's the terminology we use and the terminology we don't use, the specific local language things that we regard and the ones we don't, taglines, symbols, whatever, maybe some things that we can copy and then paste. This is how I usually explain it. And then we have the user guide that is something meant to read and to follow. So something you come back to and back to and back to over and over again. This is how I treat the comms plan, maybe, or communication guidelines.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, both of you. And I think, as we said, people can take a bit more time to look through the examples that you're willing to share, so they can follow that. Brilliant. So I just want to make sure also that we finish completely on time. By the way, if there are any questions that we missed or we didn't fully answer, there's still obviously a few minutes if you wanted to, either if you wanted to have a look at the chat box and share links, but we also have the session 2 to go through it. So actually, both Neo and Barbara mentioned a few of these, but I just wanted to say that if people wanted to do a bit more than the kind of the bare minimum that we sort of outlined at the beginning, that just to throw some ideas about what other things you can do. So there are things like someone mentioned the SWOT analysis, so the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. There are also variations of that people call it the PESTLE analysis: political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal. So that's kind of a tool that you can do. You can actually just Google it and you'll get the framework and questions for it. You could use digital analytics to sort of supplement your instinctual feeling. I think we saw an example from there. You showed us the axes of where you visually plotted your organization compared to other organizations. I think this is something that sometimes people get put off from doing, because in the private sector, they call it a competitor analysis. And, you know, in our lovey-dovey sector, we don't want to think of ourselves as competing with other people in the movement, but maybe about thinking about where you compare to your peers and what different roles you play in the ecosystem. So it can so to find templates for that, you might need to call it a competitor analysis. A perception audit is something where you actually just interview people. I think a little bit similar to some of the workshops that Barbara talked about having with their actual, you know, the people that they're actually doing this for. Is really interesting. Something about perception audit is that you can do it at the start now, and then you can do it again in 2 to 3 years, or however long your strategy process lasts for, and actually have a bit more like data, a bit more sort of like robust evidence of how much you've changed in that time. Focus groups, actually you both talked about sort of works that I think is basically like a focus group, the example in the top right. And even like as you both gave the example of like doing creative workshops to think about how you actually putting it into practice, and like what are the sentences, what are the visuals that you want to use. So you can ask any of us about this in the second session. The only thing I get to say is a mistake. I did a comms strategy process for an organization once where I did all 6 of these processes, and actually I wish that I'd just done a much more streamlined one like Barbara did right at the beginning. Just do a 2-page one quite quickly, and then as both of you said, have a kind of schedule for doing some of these more advanced things regularly to update so that the strategy actually lives. And we've got an assignment for you to get started. So if you are interested, if you would find this helpful, if you're one of those people who are sort of thinking about doing a communication strategy but don't know where to start, I would highly recommend going to this website called Smart Chart. If I click on it, I think it will show up as well. Yeah. So Smart Chart has been created by an organization that works for nonprofits. So the guidance in it is specifically for nonprofits. It's not like a lot of the private sector stuff that's out there. And it's basically just a bunch of prompting questions, but the fact that it's in a Swiss fancy website and that it sort of like asks you questions and then creates a PDF based on what answers you give just makes it feel a bit sort of like more fun to fill out to get started with. And it has a whole series of questions for the whole way through a strategy process. But I would say if you would like to come along to the second session and get some feedback, if you could answer the questions from the sections 1 to 3, download the PDF that it gives you, and then send that back to us, then that's enough for us to get started. So section 1 is decide what the organization wants to do. You can see it on the screen now, and we'll send it to you afterwards as well. Section 2 is identify the context, and section 3 is make choices about your audiences and messages. It asks you a bunch of questions, and you type like a couple of sentences answers, and then it asks you a couple of follow-up questions. So some people are asking for templates and things like that. I think this is the kind of the least work template we can give you that makes it the easiest possible way for you to just have a go at thinking about it yourself. So if you could do that and send it to Svetlana and I, our emails are on the screen. You'll also get this in the follow-up email by the end of Monday the 15th. Then we will give you specific feedback, and we can come together and all talk about it on the Wednesday the 17th. Just as a other option, if you're like, but I already have a draft comm strategy that I'm in the middle of right now. I think you know, a quarter of you said that. You can also send us your draft, but please try and, like, if it's more than 2 pages, please try and tell us which of the 2 pages we should spend time looking at, because otherwise we had 80 people in this session, so we can't look at 80 20-page PDFs. Any questions? We've got 3 minutes left. Any questions on this assignment? Have I made it clear? So either you've got something draft that you already want to send us, or if you would like to go to this website and just answer the questions for the first 3 sections, download the PDF that they give you out of that, send it to us, then you can then we'll give you feedback on it. And as Svetlana said, as Svetlana said, you can also come along to the second session without having sent us something, but please don't just be like a lurker. We would love you to actually, we'd love to be as brave as Barbara and Neo were to actually put something out there, be willing to the fact that it'll be incomplete and there will be improvements we can suggest, because it's the only way that everyone else can learn from it as well. So we'd love for as many of you as possible to send us something so that we can give you feedback and you can have it discussed with your peers. And you can also obviously reply to our email to ask us any questions about the assignment, but that I'll just put that assignment back up on screen for us again. Okay, so people seem to be happy with it. In that case, then the final oh no, we did need to plug the hub. Okay, so we will, again, you'll be able to click these links. Maybe we can even put it in the chat box. The ILGA Europe has a hub where you can access cards, and I think we've got like 15 cards of information about communications topics. And if they are sensitive issues, like we have some like private research about what messaging has worked best on topics like trans inclusion and responding to the anti-gender movement, you can register and then you'll get approved to be able to see it, so that we make sure that no dodgy actors get access to that information. Yeah, and again, all of the files and these links will be sent to you as soon as we can after this session. Yeah. And if you would like to be part of a community of people who ask questions of each other about these topics and actually voted on the topics for the skills boosts in the first place, then there's a Facebook group, LGBTI comms, that's there as well. Maybe I can even copy and paste it. There we go. All right, we have 1 minute left. So apart from saying thank you so much to Neo and Barbara for being this brave and for answering all our questions and answering your questions, the way that you can say thank you if you are not turning up to the second session is to just give us a bit of feedback right now before you log off. So we've got 3 questions for you. You can answer all 3 or just one of them if you want. What's your top takeaway from today? Just like one little thing that Neo or Barbara said that stuck with you. That's really useful for us to know. If there's anything you're still unsure about, that we didn't answer a question that you expected to be answered today, that's also useful for us to know. And if there's anything you would like more support on, it could be a completely different topic. If you want to talk about something different from comm strategies, that's fine too. But yeah, so if you before you log off, if you could type an answer to at least one of those questions, it would be really helpful for us. Top takeaway, something you're still unsure about, or something you want more support on. I can see some people are typing already. Thank you very much. We are only able to stay on for another 2 minutes. Oh no, actually, I think you can pass the admin over to one of us, can't you, Svetlana? So yeah, so I think people, once you have given us a little bit of feedback on that, you are free to leave. So I'll say again, thank you so much to Neo and Barbara, and hopefully we'll see some of you for the second session on Wednesday the 17th.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And yes, I just want to say that we will try to send you the recording and all the files by the end of this week, for you have enough time to fill the assignment if you are interested. And yes, if you are not willing to do an assignment, just join the next session. Next session is not going to be recorded, so it will be more space for really conversations. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you, of course, Neo and Barbara. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting us.